attempt to dismantle things that will break the lives of good Australian people.
Senator Rennick.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. And can I say, it's great to be here tonight to talk about this legislation. I'm not going to lie to you, it's still ultimately lipstick on a pig. There isn't a plastic surgeon in the world that could bring this dead, stinking carcass called superannuation and make it look attractive, I can assure you of that. And I will tell you why. Because superannuation is a lie. If you look at the monthly statistics that come out every month, these are the latest statistics. The median balance for women aged 55 to 64 is $118,000. That's the median balance. After 28 years, so most of these women would have been in the workforce, and men, it's $183,000, right? So these people, 55 to 64, have had 30 years of superannuation, albeit the early years are at a lower rate, but that is still less than half to get to the cut-off for the full pension. So long story short, we've got 50% of the people in this country who are still never going to come off the pension, right? So we drop $40 billion a year in lost tax revenue that go to the wealthy, right? It's only the top 10 to 20% of the people who get these taxation concessions. They don't need the incentives. They're already wealthy as it is. 13 million workers in this country. That's $3,000 a pop. $3,000 a pop to basically subsidise the wealthy. And then on top of that, you've got another $40 billion in fees shuffling around with all these different rules, stapling and benchmarking and paperwork doing this, paperwork doing that. We've become a nation of paper shufflers, and instead of focusing on asset creation, we've now got everyone trading assets and liabilities instead of actually producing goods and services. So that's all gone offshore, and we've just driven up the price of assets through superannuation. I mean, there's that much money in super now. There's $3 trillion in super. That's more than what stock market's worth. It's $600 billion of it's had to go offshore. $600 billion of it's had to go offshore. And of course, to make these things look better than they really are, there's this bit of a deal going around with all the investment funds in the world that if you invest in another country, you don't have to pay tax. We've got a classic one here, Section 855 of the 97 Act, that basically says if you're a foreigner and you invest in non-real assets, right, you own less than 10% of it, you don't have to pay capital gains tax on it, right? Now that's to appease. We have foreign investment funds invest here. Our funds invest offshore, They all give each other tax breaks, and then basically you've got base erosion, profit shifting, where all the wealthy fund managers make all the money, pay themselves bonuses because they don't have to pay tax, and the worker is the one who has to pay for it. The worker is the one that has to pay for it. And this is the sad reality. The number of people that are still on the full pension has not moved since 1992, and the number of people on the part pension has reduced from about 28% to 22%, but about 4% of that was when they changed the pension thresholds back in 2017. So all of this paper shuffling, all of these tax concessions achieves nothing. Right now, we could be in here talking about an infrastructure bank and doing something around finance and fixing up monetary policy in this country. But no. We're talking about the superannuation that only looks after the rivers of gold for both the union funds and the banks. And I just want to be clear about this. I'm agnostic. I was never in favour of superannuation from the get-go. I can remember the August 91 budget when it first came in, because it was my first year of working. And I can remember thinking, why is someone going to take 3% of my income and give it to someone I've never met and they get to manage it? I'd just finished a Bachelor of Commerce the year before, had a HECS debt, right, where I got brainwashed. I had to pay to be brainwashed because I was taught about efficient market hypothesis and that, but that's another story for another day. And then suddenly I'm now told that, oh no, I don't get to manage my own savings, we're going to give it to someone you've never met, and guess what? There's no guarantee you're ever going to get it back. That's what I love about the finance industry, is that if I took my car to a mechanic and had 4 wheels on it and it came out with 2 wheels on it, I'd probably have a pretty good case to go to the Ombudsman and say, listen, I think I've been gypped. But with fund managers, there's no guarantee you're ever going to get your capital back. I mean, they get a guaranteed fee, and if they do well, they'll pay themselves a bonus. But if you lose the money, then it suddenly becomes a relative thing. Well, we only lost 15%, the market went down 20%. Why don't you let people just put it in their house and, subject to capital gains tax on housing above $2 million, but let's put it in, at least for a lot of people who don't have an active interest in their superannuation, and there's a lot of people, and that's one of the complaints over here about stapling. Right? I tell you what they do care about is owning their own house. They get that much because that's what most people and the common man and the battler do understand are real assets. They don't live in the land of the blowhards. You know, two types of people in this country. There are the battlers and the blowhards. But for Labor to be sitting here complaining about the battlers being shafted, if you're serious about the battlers being shafted, let the battlers keep their own money. Because for most people, it's not 10% of their income. It could be 100% of their disposable income, if not more. You know, someone on $50,000, they've got to pay about $6,000, $7,000 in tax. The cost of living is $40,000. Why are we ripping out $4,000 a year in super to give it to someone these guys don't really care about when they need it now? They need it now just to make ends meet. And if you want to talk about a universal, there is no such thing as universal superannuation. The universal retirement scheme in this country is called the pension, and it's been around for a lot longer than superannuation, and it worked fine. And I tell you what, get rid of the $40 billion in tax concessions, and you could take half of that, give it back to the workers, so they'd pick up an extra $2,000 a year, and put the other $20 billion into increasing the pension by, say, 20 or 30%. I mean, the pension for the bottom 72% of the people who income levels, that costs $52 billion. So we give $40 billion in tax concession to the top 10, 20% of people, and we give 52% to the bottom 72% of the people, and they're the ones who need it most. You know, if you want a universal pension that's going to look after stay-at-home mothers, the unemployed, the people on disabilities, why don't we? And women. I mean, the whole logic, it's 10% of your income. So if you're on a low income, you only pay a small amount into super. So the benefits for super are much smaller. So it is a completely inequitable scheme. And then I want to go on about this directions power. Now, I was quoted in the Finno. I didn't support the directions power because that would be hypocritical. And the reason why it would be hypocritical for me to support it is that I believe in choice when it comes to and personal responsibility too, I might add, and the importance for people to learn how to save their own money. And there's this idea that people will never get the chance to invest if superannuation isn't an option. Well, I tell you what, I was saving and had my nose to the grindstone a long time before superannuation was invested. But is it completely hypocritical for Labor to come in here and get all upset because how dare the government tell superannuation funds what to do? Well, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but how dare the government take 10% of people's income without ever asking them and forcing them to give it to someone they've never met? Now, why can't we do what New Zealand did? New Zealand had a referendum on whether or not superannuation should be compulsory, and you know what they voted? They voted against it 92% to 8. 92% to 8. So, as for Senator O'Neill saying that we're not the true Liberals, well, I'll tell you what, I'm a true Liberal because I think that people should have the choice as to whether or not they want to invest in superannuation. It's their money. It's their money. You know, it's not the rivers of gold. It doesn't belong to the union funds or the banks. And I must say, I did a Masters of Finance, and there was one subject on superannuation. I failed the assignment. Luckily, I still passed the exam because I slagged off superannuation then, and I called out the banks in the 90s because effectively what happened was they lost their deposit base. So CBA had to go and buy Colonial Mutual, NAB had to buy National Mutual, Westpac went and bought Bankers Trust, and ANZ did a joint venture with ING. So they were clipping the ticket as well with their rivers of gold, because you'd have $500,000, say $500,000 in a mortgage over here. They'd clip the tickets on that, and then they'd have your deposit base over here through super, and they'd be clipping the tickets on that, and then they'd have financial planners and all this sort of stuff. Their rate of return when CBA, just before they sold it, before they got done over with the Banking Royal Commission, their rate of return on their fund investment division was 66%. I mean, that is an incredible return on equity, and it just goes to show what a racket superannuation is. It is nothing but rivers of gold for the blowhards, banks, unions, whatever. I don't care. But it is time that we crack down on this. It is time we crack down on this. And as for somehow claiming that we're not supporting investment in Australian assets, well, there's already $600 billion invested offshore. There's already $600 billion invested offshore with superannuation. And I've got the clip when Bob Hawke said that superannuation was going to be used to invest in Australian manufacturing. Well, that never happened, did it? And nor would it, because the Button plan and the Dawkins plan, the Button plan destroyed manufacturing and the Dawkins plan destroyed higher education, turned our kids into commodities. Everything in this country now is turned into a commodity. There's nothing about personal responsibility and letting the individual control it. No, we've got to monetise everything, and it's our kids who have suffered the most, whether it be through childcare or universities. You're treated like a transaction. It's completely wrong. It is completely wrong. But then again, there's a third side to this that never gets discussed with superannuation, and it would be, it is the biggest black hole in this country, and that is the $35 billion contingent liability for the non-military defined benefit scheme for Canberra public servants. And that is for 160,000 retired public servants. That works out at $2 million a pop. Now, the top 40,000 of those people, that liability is $137 billion, which works out at $3.5 million per retiree. Now, if you're on more than $75,000 in retirement based as an indexation as your final salary, you must have been on a big final salary. Now, can somebody tell me why the public servants in this country aren't asset tested, means tested on their assets and income like the people in the private sector? You want to talk about equality? There was never, and I often get the blow, but we can't do anything about it because we can't go around breaking contracts. There was never a contract. In order to have a contract, you've got to have an offer, an acceptance and terms and conditions. There was never an offer by the politicians in this country that they were going to pay themselves, on behalf of the retired public servants, they were going to pay themselves a gold-plated pension scheme. And there certainly was never an acceptance by the people, and there was certainly never terms and conditions laid out as to just how expensive it's going to be. $345 billion plus the military, which is about $160 billion. I don't want to touch that because these guys potentially put their lives on the line and their families get moved around a lot. You can match that off for the future fund, but that needs to be means tested. And I'll mention this to Senator Hume. She brought in this the low 450 thing to make sure that everyone gets an equal break. Well, if you think that low-income earners were getting screwed because they weren't getting $45 extra a month in superannuation, I can tell you we're all being screwed. $345 billion. That works out at about 25 million people. That works out at about $15,000 a pop that we're paying each and every one of us for the retired benefit scheme for superannuation. So I say, we need to bring this lot into it as well, because the bureaucrats are milking us dry as well. Then I'll finish off with a couple of other comments that were made by people on the other side. It was interesting that Senator Green would come in here and she didn't know anything about 293. Because if you knew anything about super, you'd know that Section 293 came in as an afterthought because effectively wealthy people who would normally pay 45 cents in the dollar only pay 15 cents when they contribute in the superannuation. So they save 30 cents up front. And then once their money's in there, they only pay 15 cents on that. But it gets even better. If you make a capital gain, you get a third of a discount. You only pay 10%. You only pay 10% on your capital gain. So if you've got assets and things in there, you get a whopping big deduction. But it's interesting because I would recommend that Senator Green go away and do a little bit of study about the tax concessions for superannuation. Another point of note here is Labor always go that superannuation is going to guarantee, and Senator Watt did it this afternoon, a decent retirement. It is not going to guarantee a decent retirement for low-income earners. The only thing that can do that is a universal pension that doesn't discriminate on the income that you earned throughout your life. Okay? This pension is paid to you and it's only means tested on your income once you retire. And if we want to talk about equality in this country, why should someone who busted their guts, whether they're a cleaner, and all these people, I can tell you, the higher up the ladder you go, the easier it gets. It's the people on the low incomes, I'm telling you now, who work the hardest in this country. They'll probably drive further to work every day to get there, back again. If they get a flat tyre and they've got to pay $400 for a tyre, I'm telling you, that'll hurt their budget a lot. That'll hurt their budget a lot. So, if you want to get serious about protecting the battlers in this country, it is time to kill superannuation stone cold dead. Thank you.
Minister,